Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have Maryanne Battles with us today. She is new to my world, but we are Microsoft alumni. So, we've had a wonderful warm up conversation and just found so much synergy in how we look at the topic of respect from a tech industry background. She's also been at Google. I'm going to turn it over to Maryanne, and she's going to introduce herself to you in a bit more depth. Over to you, Maryanne.
Great. Bobby, thank you so much for having me. And I've had the opportunity to watch your other podcasts, and they're just great with a really good variety of guests. So I'm excited to be a part of that portfolio. And the topic of respect, at first when I saw you put this out, I didn't pay attention to it as much. But as I've dug in more deeply, I think it is, as one of your guests said, it's one of the most important things to air. And I think of it as actually as an updated version of the Maslow's hierarchy. So we can talk about that in just a few minutes, but I'll tell you a little bit about my background and how we came together. So you're right, I was Microsoft alumni, and the beautiful part about Microsoft alumni is that we know each other through our circles of friends and people in our work. I was also at Gates Foundation, Google most recently, and even had a chance to spend some time with kind of proving out my theory of leadership with a private equity in between time. So I've gotten really an interesting experience kind of looking at this respect topic in tech as well as philanthropy, which is kind of an interesting conversation to have on that. But lastly, what I would say, where I have specialized in talent strategy in different ways, in believing in the growth and the future of us, as well as also having a foundation of a systems theory to pull from, which I think recognizes the complexity of our people systems. So we'll go from there.
Wonderful, Maryanne. Thank you for setting that context. And yeah, I'm really excited with each of these conversations. As like you said, respect can be so simple, but there's just so many layers to it. So I'm excited about the tech layer and the systems theory layer of it today. So let's begin with, how do you define respect?
I define respect as unlocking humanity. And what I mean by that is we are in unprecedented times where, it's going faster and faster. Every year in tech, they say, no, we're going faster. And I'm like, how can we go faster? But we go faster. And they're predicting in the future that, the next 5 years will surpass the last 5 decades of innovation. You think AI is one thing, and then there's going to be quantum that will actually really, really change. And what I'm seeing now in the system of tech is a lot of fear about being behind, a lot of fear in the system with, I think that it occurs with layoffs and people being worried about their jobs. And what happens when there's fear in the system is it seems like at the same time that polarity of respect goes down and unlocking humanity goes down, because it's really going back to the sort of neuroscience of, I'm at threat. What do I look out for? I look out for myself, and power is most important. And power is, to me, in a sense, if it's overutilized, which I see at times kind of in tech in general, is, I think, unfortunately, respect kind of gets left aside.
She nailed it. It really is about humanity. And yes, tech is moving really fast. And I don't think we're going to disappear as a species overnight. It's about reinventing ourselves. And, for the audience, Maryanne and I were just talking about how values are at the core of this. And if we think of each individual one of us as a system, I believe what I'm standing on are my values. So if you want to speak a bit about that, Maryanne.
Yeah, what we were kind of chatting about is, there's a part, and I wrote a recent article, Bobby, that I think you had a chance to review. But in a systems model with so much rapid change, the first thing as humans that we need to do is get grounded so we can breathe, take a step back, and really kind of step away from fear, but look at just overall, where are things going? How do I help others? How do I help myself? And part of that is also getting grounded to your own values, your values of where you want to lead, where you want to go, where you want humanity to go. And I bring out this humanity piece because we're seeing it globally, politically, as well as with so many different things happening. We have very different mindsets in place. And I have kind of this, after traveling extensively in my early 20s, I have this kind of thing about American business, and I love like our innovation spirit. But we will lose that if we're not unlocking humanity and growth. And we can do that together with respect as well as making profit. It doesn't have to be counter.
I love it. And all of what you're saying really is, I think we're stuck in another version of grounded, which is we're kind of grounded in fear, which leads to the kind of decisions and choices we're making. And that word fear, I've said before, I haven't coined this, but false evidence appearing real. So what evidence, what data, what facts do we believe really, to me, ultimately ends up being about me? I get to choose what I'm saying yes to, what I have agency to believe or not, and nobody can convince me otherwise. I believe it's the same for everybody.
I think it is when it's almost when you don't see respect is when I guess you don't realize that you don't see respect until it shows up, right? And what I mean by that is there's fear. And so where I've seen it show up is especially in change. When change is constant, and we've had unprecedented change between COVID and with the AI bust through the Silicon Valley with a lot of hype over it and a lot of sense of urgency. Um, and where I've seen it in cultures show up is scapegoating with leaders. I've seen it in communication. I've seen it in looking out for myself, not my team, right? And those kind of ways. And the actual power in an organization is really when you're up leveling and setting each other up for success, as well as actively through values and through leadership mindset, cultivating an environment where everyone is up leveled as a team. And it's that collaboration piece, right, that breaks down, which, that the old saying of you can go farther if you work together versus alone. And that's where I see, and it is really sort of out of fear and the fear of change and what that might mean to me. I think it shows up in tech in particular, because if you think about, I learned this at Microsoft too, and it was my own personal learning that when you're in a very heavy, high intellect organization, we oftentimes have our heads lead, our brains lead, and we lose centeredness with our heart. I see you shaking your head. It was just sort of a recognition that I had after actually having children, because I was like, I need to have more heart, and children make you have more heart.
All right.
But I think of that because I see that more so, and that's kind of my reasoning around why people will sometimes say, well, EQ is low. And typically I've seen some leaders have an amazing sense of EQ. So I don't think it's that, but I think the environment and the product causes this leverage of brain that almost disconnects from the heart.
Love it, love it, love it. Here's what I'm excited about with where we're going with this. This paradigm of fear versus love, right? So there's a lot on that. Gets relegated to the woo-woo and the spiritual mindedness. There's more and more research in science now that's saying, look, it's actually very pragmatic. Just a quick example, Raj Sisodia, sorry, one of the founders of Conscious Capitalism, gave a keynote that I speak about often many years ago. I think it's been 10 years now at their conference. And his whole premise of 45 minutes on stage was love is the most underrated four-letter word in the corporate space. So that to me ties with what you're saying is we pride our intellect so much. And I believe now we have science to prove the power of the heart actually being a mind. And hopefully we can integrate those. It's not a pendulum shift. It's not downplaying the intellect of the brain. And by the way, the brain is just the engine. The mind is what we do with it. And similarly, the heart is an engine that keeps us going, but it's what we do with what shows up, the emotions. How do we make choices that are respectful, even when we disagree? with people when it comes to respect. So I'd love, Maryanne, if you have an example of that being real. I really enjoyed how people really have got vulnerable and shared those moments of like, gee, there's a hiccup because we're still in the space of when respect's not there. Often we walk away, we end up in passive aggressiveness, but I make up you're a powerful leader who has stepped into the fire. And if you're willing, save the innocent, don't share names, but if you have an example that pops up of when you faced a challenging situation with the lack of respect and how you did your part to try and turn that around.
Sure. I think, this is an area where I'm also really growing in. And I would say the challenge that you have is the challenge that I've seen myself have is speaking truth to authority, especially growing up with deep values around authority. And it's scary and it's at the very back of my mind. So I actually would say that I kind of went through my own sort of hero's journey with saying, why is it that I have difficulty speaking to authority, to power, especially commanding power in the room? And what I realized was it actually had a link to my own childhood, right? And had to really kind of dig in, where did that come from? And so where it's potentially, not the example you're looking for, but it's an example of how I worked through, because I think part of respect is not only respect for the other, but also saying, where do I show up? And being also responsible for that, delving into how I'm showing up and how am I helping the system grow or not grow. So it's a setting up the environment for respect. So what I would say is, my recognition was also recognizing the deep fear that I had about speaking up to authority and not seeing it, authority come through to help with driving that mindset, and recognizing that it's a really deep-seated thing that I had to change, and that I actively now change, and even change it on the level of contracting. This is what I can do. This is not what I can do. Let's make some trade-offs, et cetera. Because if you don't kind of get to that root, you can't change why you have difficulty speaking about the lack of respect and the power. And I think we have so much power playing now in this environment, one level and many levels worldwide. And I think especially what I've seen from high-powered women is we're having difficulty with this at this point in time, because it is a masculine sense of power that causes the reaction from our Neanderthal days to just go into fear and to like almost retreat. But we have to actually step out of that and say, what is causing that? And if respect is not being served, then we need to either leave, choosing our values, right? And saying, but respect is important. I've tried to speak, I've tried to influence. It's not there, then I have to leave. But we have difficulty many times as women with children, families saying no, right? We're going for the kind of like taking care of everyone. But I think, that was sort of my lesson, was really kind of delving into why I had difficulty speaking, up to authority.
Yeah, Maryanne, thank you so much for the vulnerability to share that you dug into that past. I believe we all have that at some level, right? Whatever stories we've taken on, meanings we've made from past experiences. And again, it's not in the soft area. It's actually a very hard thing to do, that if more corporations actually invested in doing that, I'm not talking about therapy. I'm talking about there's some basic inquiry questions that can get us to connect. For instance, my approach to discovering your why, which of course, thank you, Simon Sinek, is a very important thing and tied to values, actually begins by looking at peak events, including those moments that have left trauma, or that were very just traumatic events. Like,
Other thing, though, with that part about how have you, you know, really worked when you saw sort of that toxic energy show up in respect. The thing that I have found, and I actually found in that circumstance, that I was talking about, was really, it's super simple, and I've coached other earlier in career people on it, is to really take a step back and say, what do I need to have to be set up for success? What do others need to have in order to be set up for success? And part of that actually first starts with what one of your other interviewers mentioned is we all have this mutual goal. Do we agree? And I think when you say a mutual goal like that, it's probably about one of the best influencing sort of levers to use to be able to pull together, which pretty much, most people have that respect something in them, but you got to pull it to the table and remind us all that we have a common goal and we need to up level each other to be successful as a team.
Yeah, it's so obvious, right? And we don't do it because we defer to the, again, back to the brain, the practical type A personality. Let's get the to-do list done. Let's get that agenda done. And we're shoving everything else under the table, and it comes to bite us when we don't deal with it. So that's why it's really a business imperative to deal with these things. And
It is.
it's just as important as, are you going to make an investment decision, or whatever it may be. Yeah.
Well, and you
Great.
talk to tech leaders and they will always say, it isn't the technology, it's the people. It's all the stuff that occurs with the people that's really hard for me to navigate and to figure out and to grow in.
Yeah.
So, right. So that goes back to that part of the heart has to be there. And that part to pull to respect together has to be there.
Yeah, Maryanne, there's another piece you touched on that we could spend a lot of time on, but I just want to touch it, and maybe we come back for part two, is a lot of what you're sharing is about patriarchy and matriarchy, right? The feminine and the masculine. And I think we need to demystify what that means. Even I am learning. Even are looking at the continuum of polarity, from paternal to maternal. There's so much judgment in how we even view those, that if we truly did the research to look at history, and by history I mean literally way before Christ, right? And even to this day, there are societies that are matriarchally structured, and look at the impact on economics, on happiness, on well-being. Tremendous, tremendous. So as a man, I'm not, please don't hear this as the listener as I'm putting down the patriarchy. I'm just saying that I think we haven't given enough attention to the merits of matriarchy. And in the workplace, we don't talk about it because a lot of it actually does get into the topic of sex, which we never talk about at work. But, again, as an anthropologist and researcher, and I'm not technically an anthropologist, but I'm very curious to learn, may we get more curious about how this animal of the human being is wired, and get to choose, right? Because the other thing you're saying that's embedded in everything, and other speakers have said, is it's about curiosity, right? You talked about boundaries. You talked about when people have stepped over have disrespected. Bringing curiosity to saying, this is how I'm feeling and seeing this. I may be right or wrong, but this is my truth. I'd love to hear yours. And that's exactly why I created the respect quotient. We don't take enough time to slow down and unpack that. And we mostly relegate things to either kindness or super rude environments, and, move on.
Your point there is really well taken, because I think about, from a, like a sort of a mega level is that female and male power is so interesting. I'm going to call it matriarchy as well as patriarchy, and how that shows up at different points and times. And I'm always, interested and kind of go back to the neuroscience of it, which is really Neanderthal days, and we had caveman and cavewoman, and kind of like what our reaction was. A tiger, a saber-toothed tiger was coming around the corner, so that causes the fear to go off. And I think you're right with that is a very strong, and so it's interesting in history to see when different parts of that come out. And there's an evolution happening, constantly. And I think we're in a really interesting evolutionary period between, the matriarchy and patriarchy. right? So there's a lot of research with Scott Galloway calling out, for young men, it's a really, really difficult world. So how are we helping to bring them along to this massively changing world with, the matriarchy, younger women actually becoming equally as successful, if not more, through education and also financial means. So I think it's a great call out because I do see what I've seen personally is more that male or patriarchy coming out in environments now. And I see it with the layoffs, with how layoffs are being done, not really thinking about how do we unlock humanity and how do we like grow forward. So what I lead with is what I love about this respect thing is we have to actually elevate that because the only way that we will be better together is through respect and collaboration. I think actually, personally, I think the antidote is having more women grow into leadership roles, and really supporting that, and also raising our men so that there's a new way and that we can bring them along. It's a pretty confusing world, right? So,
It is.
and then, bringing out that respect and values piece, that groundedness is what sets the system to allow for change. You got to get groundedness first, and then you can get regeneration. But if you
Yeah.
don't have groundedness, it goes backwards.
No, absolutely. And the way as we wrap up, groundedness to me is actually inner confidence, is that clarity back to values, right? About standing on the ground that I stand on and the fact that I'm connected and I'm just a speck in this huge cosmos. But yeah,
I think it goes back to really understanding that the mindset of the leader sets the tone for the organization. And so it has to be demonstrated that respect and how we take care of, how we up level, how we let people be seen, which builds also diversity and inclusion, is foremost important. And we're about the long term game. Sure, we want the short term, but we're building for the future and growth. So I think the top tip there is understanding it's we are building for growth. Growth, even in stable, doesn't want to grow, but building for growth of the overall workforce. And respect is the gateway for that to happen.
that's it. I think that sums it all up. Beautiful. And I'm really glad you brought that in. That's a new element. I've spoken to a lot of people, but thank you for that reminder about how it starts at the top and sets the tone both ways, right? Both ways. And back to the fear perspective as well is it a scarcity perspective or really what's possible, right? We learn how to say what if from a place of improv and curiosity and growth. If leaders connected respect in that way, if I believe we do share that, yes, we always, as humans are seeking to grow and evolve and be even better. And that's why the focus on bottom line revenue, if you connect it that way, I think it's super powerful all around.
I agree. And I think what I would underline there is respect, unlocking humanity can live in the same space as making profit. It,
That's
it,
it.
and it actually builds profit.
Absolutely. I'll make sure to highlight that quote, Maryanne. What a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.